Hello, fellow Mystery Files. For my first YouTube video, I will be ranking every single Miss Marple novel written by Agatha Christie. Now, Christie wrote 12 Miss Marple novels, which is about a third of the total number of Hercule Poirot novels she wrote, but Miss Marple fits in so well with a specific type of murder mystery, and that would be these country village type mysteries where things are more intimate and more personal. Miss Marple can use her status as an elderly spinster to infiltrate herself into situations she shouldn't be in, and she can use the knowledge she acquires from these situations to solve the murder at hand. Before I get into the rankings, I'll briefly go over my criteria. The most important thing I'm looking for is a solid mystery plot with strong mechanics. A good mystery is tightly written, doesn't leave any unsolved loopholes, and makes sense. The characters are not only intriguing and well written, but are well integrated into the story. I enjoy mysteries that only work with that specific cast of characters. Another factor I look for is simply how enjoyable the novel is. There are many mystery novels by various authors that are well crafted and imaginative, but are slogs to read, so any novel that drags is going to be lower on the list. Fair warning, there will be spoilers ahead, but I will do my best to keep those spoilers to a minimum. I will not be doing full plot summaries, however, but I will be pointing out some specific moments from each book to talk about, and that may include spoiling the killer or some other twist ending. All right, let's get into it. Starting at the very bottom at number 12 is a Miss Marple novel that is frequently mentioned as the worst Miss Marple novel, and I'm going to be honest, I didn't really consider any other option for the bottom spot here. At number 12, I put At Bertram's Hotel. Now, At Bertram's Hotel is the only full-length novel Miss Marple appears in that has thrillerish elements. Unfortunately, Miss Marple and thrillers just don't gel well. She feels completely unsuited for this type of story. Now, there is a murder plot in this novel. It's just that the murder happens very late into the book and is treated almost as an afterthought. The main storyline in At Bertram's Hotel is this string of train robberies and the disappearance of Ken and Pennyfather. And this caper isn't very interesting, unfortunately. I never find these sort of large scale crimes to be that intriguing in a mystery novel. Now, there are a few things to praise about this book. It's not a complete disaster. The setting is fantastic. Bertram's Hotel gives off these very Victorian, old fashioned vibes. Christie goes out of her way to create this image of the perfect hotel and the people staying and working there. The hotel really comes to life. Unfortunately, the setting is not used in an interesting way or really at all. The hotel is simply a front for the criminal gang involved in the train robberies, so even this novel's strongest asset is wasted away. Then we have the murder plot, which is basically just tacked on at the end and isn't very imaginative. It's one of these the intended victim is actually the murderer twist Christie had used in several books by this time in her career, and she did it better in literally every other occasion. The murderer isn't a very well developed character or even one who's particularly interesting. Miss Marple just says at the end who the culprit in the murders and the train robberies are, and that's that. There's also a ridiculous scene at the end where one of the culprits runs across several buildings, down drain pipes, and crashes a car that's completely unbelievable. Because of the lack of intrigue and lackluster murder story, and not much positive to offset that, I have to put At Bertram's Hotel at the bottom at number 12. Now for number 11, and these next four novels I kept bouncing around their placements. Each is noticeably better than At Bertram's Hotel and have a number of positive things to say about them, but they also have a lot of issues as well. It came down to which issues I believe to be bigger knocks, and at number 11 I have They Do It With Mirrors. For me, the largest problem with this book is that there really isn't enough mystery to sustain a full length novel. This is the book where Miss Marple visits her old friend Carrie Louise Sericold because Carrie Louise's sister Ruth fears that something is off at Stony Gates where Carrie Louise lives. Carrie Louise's stepson from her first marriage is murdered, allegedly because he knew Carrie Louise was being poisoned. Much of this book is just repeating the same plot points over and over again, and it's really stretched very thin. It's padded by a lot of romantic nonsense involving Gina, Carrie Louise's granddaughter, and a very obvious red herring involving the juvenile delinquents Carrie Louise's current husband is rehabilitating. We also have two late murders that are very clearly tacked on it to extend the length of the book. The killer's motivation is also pretty unbelievable in this one, and lots of the little tricks Christie uses throughout are pretty transparent. The reason why They Do It with Mirrors is above At Bertram's Hotel is because the murder plot is more involved, more thought out, and simply more interesting. It's not a great plot, but it is better than the one in At Bertram's Hotel. Miss Marple is also much better here. She uses her skills of deduction very well. She plays up the role of the fluffy elderly lady who everyone talks to, and she's able to use that to arrive at the solution. There's also this wonderful ruse she pulls where she fakes poverty in order to receive the invite from Carrie Louise in order to keep her true motivations a secret. This used to be one of my favorite Marple novels, but over the years it's fallen considerably down the list as I've learned to appreciate more nuanced mysteries. But this book is simply not up to the stupendous quality Christie pulled off time and time again, so it is here at number 11. Now, at number 10 is a book I struggle to place, and that is The Mirror Cracked from Side to Side. I think there is a case that this book should be higher up on the list, and I will admit I do think it is a better novel than the next two stories on the list, but I decided to place it here at number 10 because the mystery is so simple to solve. This is a mystery that has a lot of similarities to the story of Jean Tierney. Tierney had been exposed to German measles when she was pregnant, and her daughter was born severely disabled and had to be institutionalized. Many years later, Tierney met the woman who gave her the German measles. That almost exact situation happens to the actress Marina Gregg in this novel. The first time I read this book, I was completely unaware of Jean Tierney's story, and I was still able to solve the murder before it even happened. It's just so incredibly obvious what's going on here. Miss Marple doesn't even attend the party where the murder occurs. Plot wise, this is because she fell and injured her ankle, but realistically, Miss Marple cannot be there because she would be able to solve the crime instantly. It's frustrating to read this novel and listen to the characters talk about how baffling the situation is when the obvious solution is right in front of them. There's a lot of padding as a result of this, with two murders thrown in at the end that serve no purpose whatsoever, and these additional murders feel particularly egregious because they don't fit in with the overall story. Two victims are poisoned in a cocktail, but the other victim is shot, which doesn't jive with the killer's personality. It feels very out of place. The reason why I have it above They Do It With Mirrors, despite the two books having very similar faults, is because this book is so much better written. This is the first time we see Miss Marple's age catch up with her. Her physical abilities are starting to become more pronounced. She now has a homemaid who watches over her like a hawk. We also see what the passage of time has done to St. Mary Mead in the name of progress. There are developers and film crews in the village, and we see how Miss Marple and the other characters handle these changes. We also have a long awaited return of Dolly Bantry in this novel, who is now widowed, but still the joyous presence she always is. Any novel with Dolly Bantry is a treat. She has such a fun presence here, and she's very excited about another murder happening in Gossington Hall. This novel does have a number of fun moments and is well written when it comes to the characters of Miss Marple and Dolly Bantry, but the very simple mystery, loose construction of the murder plot, and padding means I cannot put it higher than here at number 10. Number 9, I have the final Miss Marple novel published, the final Christie published, in fact, and that is Sleeping Murder. And this one is rather interesting. It's one of the Christie's Murder in the Past mysteries. Miss Marple assists Gwenda and Giles Reed as they investigate the death of Gwenda's stepmother, Helen. Miss Marple is at the top of her game here, unlike in the previous novels I've spoken about. Her shrewd mind is in full swing. She first warns Gwenda to let Sleeping Murder lie, and when she doesn't, she gets involved to prevent more murders. She's the guiding force behind the Reeds' investigation. They do the legwork, and in typical Miss Marple fashion, she analyzes the evidence and gives them their next course of action. This is the first novel on the list where the murderer is a very strong character. Dr. Kennedy presents himself as the genteel country doctor, but underneath that facade is this vile creature madly in love with his half sister Helen. He is everything a Christie villain should be: intelligent, creepy, ruthless, and creative. I love the way he uses Gwenda and the other characters in his decades old plot. They fall right into his trap. He's not suspected by anyone but Miss Marple, despite the fact that he's really the only suspect in the novel. Christie endows him with these subtle details that make him so evil. The way he cut the tennis net so Helen couldn't throw a tennis party, and the way he lures Lily Kimball to her death. It's just so nasty and cruel, as opposed to the sort of generic and flighty murders from the previous novels on this list. The reason why I have it this low, however, is because Sleeping Murder does have a few flaws. Mainly its loose construction. There's a lot of bouncing around from place to place and lines of inquiry that don't really lead to anywhere. Another smaller issue I have is a lack of suspects. Helen had several suitors who we do meet and are treated as suspects in universe, but they appear far too late in the novel and are given so little page time that they are not truly viable suspects to the reader. Dr. Kennedy is the only true suspect, but I will say that Christie obscures this brilliantly, as I don't think many readers would suspect Dr. Kennedy, and in fact, it appears he couldn't have done it. In particular, the present day murder of Lily Kimball is written in such a way that Dr. Kennedy appears to be a completely different town at the time of the murder. Christie does this all while still playing fair. The final issue I have is that the murder plot is pretty simple. It's just a strangulation and burying the body in the garden. It's fine, but Christie has so many more complex and intriguing plots that I couldn't put Sleeping Murder any higher at the list. So here it is at number 9. Now, for number 8 is the novel immediately preceding Sleeping Murder in the Marple works, and that is Nemesis. Now, I didn't really know what to do with Nemesis, which I will admit is not a favorite of mine. I think all the Marple novels I talked about already, with the exception of At Bertram's Hotel, are actually more enjoyable than Nemesis, and I think Nemesis' murder plot is pretty bad. The reason why I put it above those novels in eighth place is because of the depiction of Miss Marple in this book. I think it is the best use of Miss Marple in any of the 12 novels she appears in. Miss Marple is tasked with solving an unspecified crime as dictated to her by the late Jason Raphael. Miss Marple is extremely old in this book, and it's a battle of her failing physical health versus the strength of her mental acuities. And spoiler alert, her brain wins out. It's a marvelous story for Miss Marple, and we see her usual distrust of human beings play out here. She's as determined as ever to solve the case and prove her detractors wrong. There are so many beautifully written scenes in this novel about Miss Marple, from how she spends her morning reading the paper to what she would do with her monetary reward should she be successful. All she wants to do is enjoy some small luxuries. Despite the overall dark tone of this novel, it is full of oddly comforting feel good moments as well. Unfortunately, that is the only thing it has going for it, in my opinion. The murder mechanics here are terrible. I think they are the worst of any Marple novel. Now, it's clear Christie wanted to focus more on the character of Miss Marple and the overarching theme of justice and injustice, but there are so many holes in the plot of this book, I can't overlook them. First and foremost, Miss Marple is basically sent on a wild goose chase where so much information is withheld from her by Jason Raphael. We're supposed to believe that Mr. Raphael wanted Miss Marple to correct an injustice and solve a crime, but he gives her absolutely no information about this crime. He only leaves her tickets for a bus tour, which she goes on and meets a few people Mr. Raphael has also contacted before his death. But there are so many times when Miss Marple is speaking to someone who utters a bunch of cryptic clues and words, and instead of asking some follow-up questions, she just lets it go. None of this makes any sense and is out of character for her. It's also pretty clear that both Jason Raphael and Elizabeth Temple know exactly what happened to the murder victim, Verity Hunt, but they don't say anything. It's an intriguing plot, but it just falls apart at the slightest scrutiny. We also have a present day murder, that of Miss Temple, who dies when a boulder is pushed on her. She hangs on long enough to speak some more cryptic clues instead of just telling Miss Marple who killed Verity. I'm willing to believe a lot of strange things for the sake of a mystery novel, but whenever someone is talking in cryptic clues, especially before dying, it's just too much for me. Nemesis has a brilliant portrayal of Miss Marple, but the bad mystery plot means I cannot put it any higher than number 8. Now, at number 7, I have a novel that I think belongs perfectly here at just below the halfway point, as it is significantly stronger than the previous novels, but just can't compete with the 6 above it. So the halfway point seems about fair to me, and that is A Caribbean Mystery. And A Caribbean Mystery is pretty good. For me, it doesn't have many lows, but also doesn't have many highs either. Miss Marple is holidaying on St. Honore when a fellow guest, Major Palgrave, dies mysteriously and a hotel employee named Victoria is murdered. Major Palgrave's death is sort of pushed aside as natural causes, but Miss Marple does not believe this because she thinks the Major recognized someone at the resort as having murdered in the past. And much of her investigation involves her trying to figure out if he was speaking about a wife murderer or a husband murderer or some other kind of murderer, and which direction Major Palgrave was looking at when he suddenly realized the person in his photo is on the island. Miss Marple is particularly active in this one, which is a bit unusual and out of character for her, but it's also refreshing. She's not doing anything overly ridiculous, and she is on the island to recover from ill health, so solving the murder is something she not only wants to do, but needs to do for her own sake. There's no shocking twist at the end of this one. We simply have a husband trying to murder his wife, only to be foiled by Major Palgrave recognizing him, and then Victoria realizing the Major was murdered and then murdering the entirely wrong person at the end of the novel. There's a lot of obfuscation in this one, and it's clever because we do have a wife killer, only a wife hasn't been killed, so you're not really looking at the husband as strongly as you would normally. It's a very strong mystery plot, but it isn't as creative or inventive as the top six. I also think some of the characters are a little lackluster and blend together. None of the suspects are really distinct or well drawn, so I have a Caribbean mystery just below the halfway point at number 7. Now for number 6, and I think these top six are all fantastic Marple novels, but at number 6 I have what I think is the least strong of the bunch, and that is 450 from Paddington, the only Marple Christmas novel. This is another very strong novel where Miss Marple's friend witnesses a man strangling a woman on a passing train, and that body turns up at Rutherford Hall, home of the wealthy invalid Luther Crackenthorpe. I'm a big fan of these niche mystery novels where there is a corpse and no one knows its identity, or at least no one will admit to knowing who it is. The possibilities are endless with this kind of story. The star of this novel is Lucy Isles Barrow, who is definitely in the top 5 greatest one time Christie characters. It's a shame she was never reused in a future novel. She's a great character. Lucy is a young, intelligent woman who could do anything with her life, but she chooses to be a domestic servant because help is in such short supply. She knows she can not only charge whatever she wants for her services, but also she can call the shots at her position as well. She runs circles around the Crackenthorpes, and she secures a position at Rutherford Hall where she does Miss Marple's bidding and finds the body hidden in a sarcophagus of all places. Miss Marple is rarely on the scene here, but Lucy frequently checks in with her and receives instructions on what to do. The investigation part of this novel isn't that interesting. It's a lot of talking and speculation about who the woman could be. It's probably either a missing French dancer or a woman named Martine who may or may not have married Luther Crackenthorpe's oldest son before the war. It's not the most dynamic part of the book, but it's not a slog or anything like that. There are some delightful Marple moments, such as when she laments that the murderer won't be hanged because capital punishment has just been abolished in England, and when she faints choking on a fish bone to expose the murderer. It's all very dainty of Miss Marple, but also shows how shrewd and devious she can be. I did contemplate placing 450 from Paddington one spot higher. The reason why I didn't is because of a ridiculous coincidence at the end of the novel, where we learn that Martine is actually the mother of James Stoddard West, a friend of Luther's grandson. It's really just too much to swallow, and it's just kind of thrown in at the end. So I have 450 from Paddington here at number 6. Number 5 is a book I think you could make an argument for being lower on the list, but I enjoy it a lot, and that is The Moving Finger. Now, this is a novel in which Miss Marple barely appears. She shows up about two-thirds of the way through the book, asks a few questions, and then solves the whole case almost instantly. The reason why I do have it this high is simply because there's a lot of fun. I really enjoy the concept of the poison pen letter shielding the true motivations for the murder. Plus, it's just a lot of fun reading about these stuck-up villagers talk about how scandalous the letters are. Christie listed this as one of her favorite novels, and I can understand why. It's a very unique look into a quiet yet sinister country village. Christie beautifully executes a red herring with the anonymous letters. They're completely useless and have nothing to do with the murder plot, which again is just a husband who wants to murder his wife. Red herrings, I think, have a tendency to be disappointing when an author invests so much time in them, only for them to not matter in the end. But here, Christie skillfully pulls it off. We have two suspicious deaths in the same household, and yet the reader isn't really looking in that household for a murderer because of the letters. It's fantastic. Now, I think there is too much time spent on this romance between the protagonist, Jerry Burton, and Megan Hunter, which I just didn't care about. Megan's portrayal is also pretty bad, where she's called horseface and ugly for the duration of the novel. Jerry basically kidnaps her and sends her off to get beautiful so he can marry her, which is an uncomfortable sequence that hasn't really aged well. I also think Christie misses an opportunity by not setting this book in St. Mary Mead. It would have been fantastic to see Miss Marple or the Bantrys or the Clements receive a poison pen letter instead of a bunch of people at Limstock I just didn't care about. The sheer fun of this novel is enough, in my opinion, to place it at number 5, but there are several flaws where I think it can be argued it should be around number 6 or 7, but I put it here at number 5. Number 4 is a book I'm a little surprised is this high because I never think of it as one of my favorite Miss Marple novels, but I do have A Pocket Full of Rye here at number 4. This is another novel where the portrayal of Miss Marple is fantastic. She's full of righteous indignation over the murder of a maid she trained named Gladys, who is one of 3 victims in this novel. This is a woman who will not be stopped until she finds Gladys's killer. Christie also skillfully uses poison in this novel, where Gladys unintentionally poisons the patriarch of the house, Rex Fortescue, with taxine under the belief she's using a truth serum. Now, this sounds ridiculous, but Gladys is portrayed as flighty enough that it's totally believable. A Pocket Full of Rye is full of twists and turns, yet maintains its tightly written format. We have confusion over the order in which the victims are killed. This is one of Christie's and the only Marple novel with a nursery rhyme theme, and she uses it very well. I do think sometimes Christie goes a bit overboard trying to fit the story to the rhyme, but here she does it very smoothly. Lance Fortescue is one of the most vile of Christie's murderers. He's such a good character. I love when a killer is just completely ruthless who will use anyone and anything to achieve their goals. He doesn't even try to hide it at points. The final scene where Miss Marple receives a photograph of Gladys with Lance, who's pretending to be someone else, is one of the best finales to any Christie novel. Miss Marple is happy because she has her physical proof to convict Lance, yet it is heartbreaking to see Gladys blissfully unaware her boyfriend is about to kill her to achieve his wicked means. I have to say, I don't find this book as entertaining as, say, The Moving Finger or The 450 from Paddington, but the mystery is of such good quality, I had to put it above those two titles. I wish we didn't get a series of interviews with some of the suspects, as I always find that kind of boring, but that's really just a minor knock in this case. I couldn't justify having it any lower than number 4. Now for the top three, and these three are definitively the top three Marple novels for me. I never considered any other novels for these top spots, and I think the order was always clear for me. I did briefly consider switching numbers 2 and 3, but I ultimately left them in their original positions. And at number 3, I put The Body in the Library. And this is a classic piece of detective fiction. It has all of the tropes of a typical Golden Age mystery, and Chrissy plays off that a lot here. The Body in the Library is a little bit of a satire of sorts. We have the typical country village of St. Mary Mead and all the local gossip that comes with that. We have the glitz and the glamour of the Majestic Hotel. We have a bunch of greedy suspects, and it all comes together to form a fantastic mystery. The reason why I couldn't put it at number 2 is because I think the murder plot has some holes. They don't detract from the reading experience, however. This novel features a body swap. The body in Colonel Bantry's library, who we are told is Ruby Keene, is actually the teenage girl guide Pamela Reeves. Now, the reader would and should be fooled by this. The problem is that the police really should have gotten this right from the start. The body in the library has bitten nails and is a virgin, which is something uncomfortable, but it is there. And realistically, the police never should have accepted the identification of Pamela as Ruby. But I don't think this is so egregious because this is a mystery novel and readers should be willing to cede some credibility for the sake of the murder plot. But this body swap is a great mechanic because it provides alibis for the killers while allowing them to frame their target in Basil Blake. The Bantrys appear in this book, and both of them are very well written. Mrs. Bantry is a lot of fun, as she always is, and the Colonel becomes downtrodden and ostracized because he is also a victim in this. The body was found in his library, so that makes him a prime suspect, and everyone in St. Mary Mead thinks he is at least having an affair with Ruby Keene, if not killed her. This provides Miss Marple with the motivation to solve the murder. It's very similar to her righteous indignation in A Pocket Full of Rye. Now, there are some minor issues here. Many of the characters, including Miss Marple, really seem to think Ruby got what she deserved. There is no sympathy shed for her, and the majority of concern is for Pamela Reeves and Colonel Bantry, who are depicted as more worthy of living. Ruby is basically portrayed as a man hungry slut who deserved to die for her moral actions, and that's not great. There's also a lot of these generic inspector characters who aren't that interesting and sort of blend together. But overall, The Body in the Library is a very strong novel, and it's these minor flaws that keep it out of the top two spots here at number 3. In second place, I have the very first Miss Marple novel, and that is The Murder at the Vicarage. This is another classic piece of detective fiction, and it bears a lot of similarities to Christie's first novel, The Mysterious Affair at Styles, and I think she does everything better in this book than she does in Styles. We have a jerk victim in Colonel Prothero, a cast of suspicious characters who all hate him. Christie even uses the same trick of lovers incriminating themselves in order to throw off the police. And crucially, the reader will fall for it again, even though she used the exact same trick just a decade earlier. It really shows Christie's skills as a writer that she can keep using the same twists multiple times and have them work on almost every occasion. This is our introduction to the people in St. Mary Mead, and they are all wonderful. There's, quote, that terrible Miss Marple, unquote, and her gossipy spinster friends who provide a lot of entertainment. The Reverend Clement is a humorous narrator. I always love his antics with his wife Griselda, with her being so much younger than he is, and wondering why he ever married her to begin with, though it is clear they are madly in love. I wish we saw more of them in future novels, but really don't, other than cameo appearances here and there. Compared to the other 10 Marple novels I've talked about, I don't really have any flaws with the murder mechanics in Murder at the Vicarage. It's very tightly written, complex, intriguing, and we aren't left with any plot holes. The reason why is it not at number one is because I think that book is just more entertaining. I feel at times Murder at the Vicarage has too much going on in it. There are a lot of side plots that do connect with the overall murder mystery, but there are simply way too many of them, and we could have done if one or two of them had been cut. Whereas the book I have at the top spot doesn't really have that issue. We never go into side paths there, so I do have Murder at the Vicarage here at number two. Now for the top spot. At number one, I have what I typically see placed at the top of Miss Marple novel rankings. It's near universally looked at as the best Miss Marple, and that is A Murder is Announced. And this book is a joy to behold from beginning to end. There's never a dull moment, and each page focuses on the mystery at hand. The book starts off with the mysterious announcement in the Chipping Cleghorn Gazette about a murder that is going to happen at Little Paddocks, where Letitia Blacklock lives. No one at Little Paddocks claims to know anything about this, but a number of neighbors show up and a holdup man is shot to death after apparently failing to murder Miss Blacklock. There are two more murders, those of Miss Blacklock's friend Bunny and a neighbor named Miss Murgatroyd, and both of these deaths are significant to the plot. They are not these deaths thrown in at the end for page length, and both deaths are really quite heart wrenching. You really don't see that kind of thing in Christie very often, where you have emotional murders. The novel is exceptionally well plotted. Christie plays extremely fair throughout, even at times being a little too fair. She puts clues right in front of our faces, and they go completely unnoticed. For Christie to have Bunny openly call Letty Lottie is incredibly bold and risky. If a reader notices that, the jig is up, so to speak. I appreciate all of these tricks she does, and I don't think there are many mystery writers who could pull it off or would even attempt to do so. Miss Marple is also fantastic in this novel. We get a lot of great comments about her, such as when the vicar says that, oh, there's a murder in the village, so naturally Aunt Jane has to show up. We also see a lot of Miss Marple's dual nature in this book. We see the kindly Miss Marple who comforts Miss Blacklock when Bunny dies, and Miss Hinchcliffe when Miss Murgatroyd dies. Then we see that stern Miss Marple who doesn't have any sympathy for Miss Blacklock when she's revealed to be the murderer. She does not care about Charlotte's miserable life, being an invalid and having her illness and her goiter and all that. And she receives quite a bit of glee knowing Miss Blacklock is going to be hanged. I think an underrated asset of this book is its setting. Christie is at her best in this post World War II era, where one feels the burden of the aftermath of the war on the characters. In A Murder is announced, Britain is still experiencing food rationing, and this becomes a central plot point of the novel. The villagers have their own secret black market going on, and because of this, they enter each other's houses, which provides the killer with the opportunity to do what they need to do in each of these places. The war also allowed Miss Blacklock to move into Chipping Cleghorn because people are moving a lot during the war, and they're moving into these small villages where no one knows them. I appreciate how well Christie is able to incorporate the time in which this novel is set into her plot. It functions more than just the setting, it's part of the mechanics. A Murder is announced as so much going on for it that it takes the crown spot at number one. And that's it for this video. If you want to see more mystery fiction content, hit the subscribe button, like this video, and share. In the future, I will rank the Poirot novels over the course of 2 or 3 videos, and then I'll do the other Christie novels before ranking some works by other mystery authors. I'm a big fan of Ellery Queen and Niall Marsh and Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, so I'll probably do them next. I also want to rank short stories from individual collections and rank the murderers as characters as well. Feel free to agree or disagree with my placements in the comments. So until next time, Mystery Files, thanks for watching.